On October 7th, I woke up before my alarm clock went off. Old age has its peculiarities. Sleep becomes shorter, and there is more time for reflection. Cool autumn light seeped through the window, painting my bedroom in shades of gray and blue. Central Point has always been a city with a special light, soft, as if filtered through a thin veil of clouds. I reached for the bedside table, groping for my glasses. 74 years had not passed without leaving their mark. My hands, once perfectly firm, now trembled slightly, and my skin was covered with age spots and veins that resembled a river map. But my eyes still saw what others did not notice. The bathroom mirror reflected my face, stern, with deep wrinkles and an attentive gaze. I, Violet Morris, had never been a beauty, but my face had always revealed my character. And character is something that does not age, even when the body gives up. After a quick breakfast of toast with jam and strong tea, I got dressed for work. No concessions to age, a white blouse, strict trousers, minimal jewelry. My only indulgence was a silver brooch with a large amethyst, a memento of my mother. This brooch seemed to have absorbed her words, which I remember from childhood. Violet, keep your back straight and your gaze even straighter. My house was only 4 blocks from the workshop, and I preferred to walk, despite the morning chill. Central Point woke up with me. Shops opened, employees hurried to work, mothers took their children to school. Some nodded to me in greeting. After 51 years of working in one place, you inevitably become part of the cityscape. I turned the corner and my gaze automatically found the sign, Morris, Jewelry Workshop. No fancy fonts or neon lights, just a modest engraved brass plaque. My father always said, good wine needs no advertising, and I inherited that philosophy. The bell jingled as I opened the door. The smell of the workshop, a mixture of metal polish, the light aroma of leather cases, and the faint smell of burnt solder, hit my nostrils with a familiar greeting. I took a deep breath, allowing myself a moment of pleasure. The house may change, the body may age, but this smell remains the same. The workshop consisted of 2 rooms, the front part with display cases and a counter for customers, and the back room, where the real magic happened, the restoration, creation, and repair of jewelry. 51 years ago, I bought this small corner shop, transforming it from a modest repair workshop into a place known for its unique products and impeccable quality of work. I turned on the lights and the coffee maker, a morning ritual I performed with clockwork precision. While the water was heating, I checked the logbook. 2 pairs of earrings for repair, 1 order for wedding rings, 3 necklaces for cleaning. Opening the safe, I took out the pieces I had been working on yesterday. A silver bracelet with sapphires for Judge Lancaster, and a gold medallion that needed to be restored by Friday. With age, my fingers had lost their former dexterity, but they had gained the wisdom of many years of experience. I knew how to handle metals and stones as if they were part of me. Alfred often joked that I married him only because his last name was Morris, and I didn't have to change the sign when my father died. Alfred. Thoughts of my late husband always brought mixed feelings. 15 years ago, cancer took him, leaving me alone with the workshop and my daughter, who by then was a grown woman with her own life. We had been together for 34 years, not always in harmony but with respect and affection. He was a kind man who accepted me for who I was, my obsession with work, my inability to express my feelings, and my awkwardness as a mother. My gaze fell on a photograph on the desk, Alfred holding little Hazel in his arms. They are both about 35, smiling not at the camera, but at each other. My place behind the camera, as in their lives, is always slightly to the side, observing but not fully involved. Hazel inherited her father's best traits, his gentleness, emotionality, and ability to connect with people. She got her stubbornness and pride from me, not the best combination for a daughter who expected more warmth from her mother than she could give. Our relationship has always been complicated. When she was little, I worked late, missed school events, and didn't find time for girlish secrets and heart-to-heart talks. Alfred compensated for my shortcomings, becoming both a father and a mother to our daughter. But after his death, the gap between us only widened. Now our communication was limited to rare phone calls and even rarer meetings on holidays. The bell rang, announcing the first visitor. I put down my magnifying glass and tweezers, covered my work with a piece of soft cloth, and went to the front of the store. "Good morning, Mrs. Morris," said a tall, thin man with a receding hairline. I nodded, recognizing the visitor as Silas Phipps. He had first appeared in my workshop 3 months ago when he brought in a pocket watch for repair. Since then, he had been coming in regularly, sometimes to have his cufflinks polished, sometimes to have an antique tie pin appraised. His manners were always impeccable, but there was something about him that made me instinctively wary. Perhaps it was his overly attentive gaze or his excessive politeness, behind which I sensed a steely resolve. "How can I help you today, Mr. Phipps?" I asked, maintaining professional courtesy. "Just stopped by to see if my good friend had been here." He paused. "Bryce Gwynn." The name of my brother-in-law, uttered by this man, sounded like a blow to my nerves. I kept my expression impassive. "I'm afraid not. Mr. Ginn rarely visits my workshop." "I understand," Phipps nodded. "If you see him, please tell him that I would be very happy to talk to him about our mutual business." Something in his tone suggested to me that these common affairs were unlikely to be of a pleasant nature. I knew that my brother-in-law worked as an electrical engineer, at least according to Hazel. What business could he possibly have with a man like Phipps? "I'll pass it on if I see him," I replied dryly. Phipps smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'd be very grateful. You know, debts should be repaid on time, especially if they involve certain promises." His words sent a chill down my spine, but I didn't show it. Experience had taught me that the best way to deal with unpleasant situations was to maintain my dignity and not show weakness. "I'll just tell him you stopped by." Phipps nodded, glanced around the workshop once more, and left, leaving behind an unpleasant feeling and a lot of questions. I went back to work, but my thoughts kept returning to the strange visit. This was the third time Phipps had asked about Bryce. What connected my brother-in-law to this man? And why didn't Bryce come himself if he had business with Phipps? Bryce Gwynn joined our family 8 years ago. Hazel introduced him as a successful engineer with a promising career in a technology company. He was attractive, said all the right things, and seemed to genuinely love my daughter. But something about him always made me wary, perhaps his excessive self-confidence or the ease with which he talked about his achievements. Alfred taught me to trust my intuition. In our business, Vay, first impressions are often right, whether it's a stone or a person, he used to say. And my first impression of Bryce wasn't positive, although I never mentioned it to my daughter. A phone call interrupted my thoughts. I wiped my hands on my apron and picked up the receiver. "Morris Jewelry," I said. "Mom?" Hazel's voice sounded tense. "We need to talk." My stomach clenched. In recent years, that phrase had never boded well. "What's wrong?" "Not over the phone. Can we meet today?" I mentally checked my to-do list for the day. 2 clients after lunch, work on a bracelet that needed to be finished by Wednesday. "I can meet at lunchtime at the Blue Cup at 1 o'clock, I suggested, naming a small cafe not far from the workshop. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Okay," Hazel finally agreed. 1 o'clock. It's important, Mom." "I'll be there," I replied, trying not to let the concern in my voice show. We said goodbye, and I hung up, staring at the phone as if it could give me a clue as to the reason for this unexpected call. Hazel rarely called just to chat. Usually, our conversations were limited to birthday greetings, brief health updates, and holiday plans. What could be so important that she wanted to meet in person? I returned to work, but thoughts of the upcoming meeting and Phipps' strange visit prevented me from concentrating. Twice I made a mistake in setting the stone, a mistake I hadn't made in decades. Shortly before noon, Mrs. Patterson came in to pick up her repaired necklace. While I was packing it into a velvet case, she shared the town news, as was her custom. "Have you heard about the Reeves? Their son lost his job at that big tech company. They say it's due to cutbacks. These are the times we live in. No one is immune," she chirped, fingering the beads of her long-suffering pearl necklace. I nodded politely, only half listening to other people's troubles. But one phrase caught my attention. "Which tech company?" I asked, trying to make the question sound like normal politeness. "Alpha Tech, I think, the same one your son-in-law works for. Or am I mistaken?" I felt my heart skip a beat. Bryce did work at Alpha Tech. If there were layoffs there. Possibly, I replied neutrally. I'm not sure I know all the details of his career. Mrs. Patterson smiled understandingly. Of course, of course. Young people are so secretive these days. My nephew works there too, and he says this is only the first wave of layoffs. I handed her the package necklace and the receipt. After Mrs. Patterson left, I sat down on a chair trying to piece together the scattered pieces of the puzzle. Hazel's unexpected call, Phipps' strange visits, the mention of debts, Bryce's possible job loss. The picture was not a pleasant one. If Bryce had lost his job and owed money to someone like Phipps, that could explain the urgency with which Hazel wanted to meet. But what was she planning to do? And what role did I play in this situation? I glanced at my watch. It was 1:45. It was time to close the studio for lunch and go meet my daughter. Hanging up a back at 2 p.m. sign and double-checking the lock, I headed to the Blue Cup, preparing for a conversation that I felt could change my measured life. The Blue Cup was a small cafe on the corner of Hartford Street and Baker Avenue, a 5-minute walk from my workshop. The name perfectly matched the interior. The walls were painted a muted blue, and the tableware was exclusively blue, in different shades and shapes. I often stopped by during my lunch break, preferring a secluded table in the corner from which I could see the entire room. Today I arrived 10 minutes early, an old habit I couldn't shake. Punctuality has always been a matter of respect for me, and perhaps a defensive strategy. To arrive first, choose a seat, and prepare myself mentally. Denise, the waitress who knew me as a regular customer, nodded cheerfully and headed for my table. The usual, Mrs. Morris? Earl Grey tea and a tuna sandwich? Just tea today, Denise. I'm waiting for my daughter. Her eyebrows rose slightly. After years of working with me, she knew me well enough to understand that a visit from my daughter was an unusual event. Of course. Let me know when you're ready to order. She left, and I waited, smoothing out imaginary wrinkles in the tablecloth. The air in the cafe seemed to thicken with the anticipation of a difficult conversation. Hazel arrived at exactly 1 o'clock. I noticed her figure through the window. Straight back, confident gait, light hair pulled back into a neat bun. Outwardly, my daughter resembled me in my youth, but her expression was softer, and her eyes held an emotionality inherited from her father. The bell above the door rang as she entered. She paused for a moment, scanning the room, and then, noticing me, headed for the table. "Hi, Mom," Hazel said, leaning in for a quick, formal kiss on the cheek. She smelled of light floral perfume and a nervous tension that I had learned to recognize over the years. "Hello, dear." I gestured for her to sit down. "You look well." It was true. At 42, Hazel had retained her slim figure and fresh complexion. But today there were shadows under her eyes that I hadn't noticed when we last met 2 months ago, and her smile seemed forced. "Thank you," she said, sitting down and taking off her light coat. The sleeve of her blouse rode up, and I noticed a bluish mark on her wrist, clearly a bruise, and a fresh one at that. Hazel caught my glance and quickly pulled her sleeve down. Denise came over to take our order. Hazel ordered coffee and a salad, but it was clear that she wasn't very interested in food right now. We sat in awkward silence until the waitress brought our drinks. I didn't rush the conversation. Experience told me it was better to let Hazel start when she was ready. "How's work?" she finally asked, stirring her coffee with exaggerated attention. "Same as always. Clients, orders, repairs." I took a sip of tea. "How are things at the lab?" Hazel worked as a chemical analyst for a pharmaceutical company, a career path far removed from jewelry making, perhaps because she wanted to be different from me. "Fine," she shrugged. "We're working on a new project right now." I waited for her to get to the real reason for our meeting, but Hazel seemed to be searching for the right words. "What happened to your hand?" I asked directly, nodding toward her wrist. "It looks painful." She instinctively touched the spot where I saw the bruise and laughed nervously. "It's nothing. I hit it on the closet door when I was looking for some papers." I knew my daughter well enough to realize she wasn't telling the truth, but I also knew that pressuring her would only make her shut down even more. "I see," I said, not pressing the issue. "Did you want to talk about something important?" Hazel sighed, putting down her spoon. Her gaze became more focused, as if she had made some kind of internal decision. Yes, it's about Bryce. I felt the muscles in my back tense, but I tried to keep a neutral expression on my face. What about him? He lost his job, Hazel said, watching my reaction closely. Alpha Tech had massive layoffs last week. I nodded. So the rumors Mrs. Patterson had been spreading were true. I'm sorry to hear that. I hope he finds a new job quickly. Hazel bit her lower lip, a gesture she had done since childhood when she was nervous. It's not easy to find a job at his age and with his specialization. The market is flooded with young professionals willing to work for less money. At that moment, Denise approached with a salad for Hazel. We both remained silent while she set the table and left. Why was he laid off? I asked when we were alone again. I heard that Alpha Tech is a stable company. Hazel paused, picking at the salad leaves with her fork. They said it was downsizing, but I think it's because of his age. Bryce is 46, and they prefer to hire 25-year-olds. Something in her voice, a slight hesitation, her averted gaze, told me that wasn't the whole truth. How long ago did this happen? 3 weeks ago, Hazel said, putting a piece of lettuce in her mouth, but it was clear she wasn't enjoying her food. He goes to interviews every day, but so far without success. I sipped my tea thoughtfully. 3 weeks. Silas Phipps started showing up at my studio about 3 months ago. Something didn't add up. How are you managing financially? Hazel grimaced. We have savings, and my salary is enough to cover the basics for now. But, she paused, the mortgage, insurance, car loan, everything has become more difficult. I nodded understandingly. Behind her calm statement of facts, I sensed a request for help that her pride prevented her from expressing directly. If you need money, Hazel, you could have just said so. Her face tensed, and her eyes flashed with an expression I had seen too often in our conversations, a mixture of irritation and long-standing resentment. It's not just about money, Mom, she put down her fork. Bryce needs a job, not a handout, but an opportunity to use his skills, to feel useful. I frowned, not quite understanding where she was going with this. I doubt I can help you find a job for an electrical engineer. Hazel took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. Mom, Bryce has always admired your workshop. He's technically gifted and a quick learner. And now, I felt a chill run down my spine when I realized what she was trying to say. Are you suggesting I hire him in a jewelry workshop? Hazel leaned forward, a pleading note in her voice. Why not? You're 74, Mom. You can't work alone forever. You need an assistant and he needs a job. It's the perfect solution. I shook my head slowly, trying to comprehend the absurdity of the situation. Hazel, your husband has never shown any interest in jewelry. He's an engineer, not a jeweler. They're completely different professions that require different skills. But you could teach him, she insisted. You learned from scratch yourself. I was 19 when my father started teaching me, I replied. And I grew up watching him work. It's not something you can learn in a couple of weeks. Hazel's face hardened. So, you're just refusing to help? I felt irritation boiling up inside me. How many times over the years had we had conversations like this? Hazel with her accusations, me with my rational explanations, neither of us listening to the other. I'm not refusing to help, I said, trying to stay calm. I'm just saying it's not the best option. Not for me, not for Bryce. Of course, Hazel said bitterly. Because you always know what's best for everyone. Only for some reason, your decisions always benefit you. It was an old wound that had never completely healed. Her childhood feeling that work was always more important to me than family. That's not fair, Hazel. Not fair? Her voice grew louder, attracting the attention of the neighboring tables. You know what's not fair? When your mother misses your graduation because she has an important client. When she forgets your birthday because she's working on another order. When your father dies and she finds comfort not in her family, but in her precious workshop. I felt the color rush to my face. The cafe patrons were now listening openly to our conversation. Let's not make a scene, I said quietly. You know very well that I did everything I could to provide for you and give you a good education. Provide? Hazel laughed bitterly. I never asked for money or things. I asked for attention, Mom. Time, love, things that can't be bought or sold. I pressed my lips together, feeling old guilt mingling with irritation. Every time we argued, Hazel returned to the same accusations, as if I were to blame for all her difficulties in life. I loved you as best I could, I finally said. Maybe not the way you wanted, but that doesn't mean there was no love. Hazel looked away, her shoulders slumping. Sometimes I think you're incapable of love, Mom. That there's only room in you for rocks and metals. Her words hit harder than I expected. Over the years, I had learned to defend myself against such accusations, but today, for some reason, they broke through my armor. That's not true, I said quietly. I loved your father, and I love you, even though you don't believe it. A heavy silence hung between us. Hazel absent-mindedly ran her fork around her plate without looking up. Listen, I finally said. I understand that you and Bryce are in a difficult situation, and I want to help. But taking him to work in the workshop, that's not the solution, Hazel. It will only create new problems. You don't even know him, she objected, but without the same aggression as before. You haven't seen what he's capable of. I sighed. It's not about his abilities. Jewelry making requires years of practice, a special disposition, patience. Or maybe it's just that you don't want to share your little kingdom. Hazel flared up again. That you don't trust anyone, not even your family. It's not a question of trust, I began, but she interrupted me. No, it is a question of trust. You've never trusted anyone, not Dad, not me, no one. You've always believed that only you know what's right, what's best. And now, at 74, you're still not ready to let anyone into your life, even if it could help your own family. There was some truth in her words that I didn't want to admit. I really did always prefer to rely only on myself, to control everything myself. It was my strength and my weakness. Hazel, I said, trying to speak more gently, I'm not refusing to help, but let's think about other options. Maybe I could give you a loan. We don't need your money, she said sharply, and I noticed her hand twitch involuntarily toward her wrist, where a bruise was hidden. Bryce won't accept it. He's a proud man. Something in her gesture and her words made me wary. Bryce had always struck me as a practical man, even cynical. Was his pride now preventing him from accepting financial help from his mother-in-law? Then what exactly do you want from me? I asked bluntly. Hazel hesitated, then looked up at me, her gaze determined but with a hint of hidden despair. I want you to at least meet with him, talk to him, give him a chance. I looked closely at my daughter. Something about this situation was clearly wrong. The connection between Silas Phipps's visits, Bryce's dismissal, the bruise on Hazel's wrist, and her insistent request to hire her brother-in-law was forming an alarming picture. All right, I finally said. Come to the workshop together tonight after closing. At 8 o'clock, we'll talk, and I promise I'll listen to him. Hazel's face brightened, though her eyes still showed concern. Thank you, Mom. That means a lot to me. I nodded, gesturing to the waitress to ask for the check. Don't thank me too soon. I'm only promising to listen, but I'm not promising anything about the job. I understand, said Hazel, reaching for her wallet. I'll pay, I stopped her. For a moment, a stubborn expression appeared on her face, but then she nodded, accepting this small gesture. We left the cafe in silence. The day was clear but cool, and Hazel wrapped her coat tightly around herself. See you tonight, Mom, she said, giving me an awkward hug goodbye. I nodded, watching her walk down the street, her back straight, her gait determined, but every movement betraying the tension she was trying to hide. Returning to the studio, I couldn't shake the feeling that tonight would be a turning point in our relationship. And for some reason, I had a feeling that the upcoming conversation would reveal more than just a possible job for Bryce Gwynn. After lunch, I returned to the workshop, but I couldn't concentrate. Twice, I almost ruined the clasp on the pendant I was working on. An unforgivable mistake for someone with my experience. Fragments of my conversation with Hazel were spinning around in my head, her accusations hitting me harder than I wanted to admit. You only have room for stones and metals. That wasn't true. I loved Alfred. In my own way, not as demonstratively as others, but sincerely. And I loved Hazel too, although perhaps I didn't know how to show it in the way she needed. The day dragged on endlessly. Customers came in, I mechanically performed my duties, but my thoughts kept returning to the upcoming conversation. The feeling of anxiety would not go away. Something told me that there was more to Hazel's persistence than just a desire to help her husband find a job. At 7:30, I closed the workshop to visitors but left the lights on. I washed my hands, took off my work apron, and put the kettle on. These little things helped me gather my thoughts and prepare for the conversation. At exactly 8 o'clock, the front door opened and the bell rang softly, as if it too sensed the tension of the moment. Hazel entered first, wearing the same coat she had worn during the day, but with a more elegant blouse. Bryce appeared behind her. My brother-in-law was an attractive man of medium height, with dark hair slightly touched by gray and attentive brown eyes. He was wearing a formal suit, clearly put on for the meeting, too formal for a normal evening. He smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Good evening, Violet," he said, stepping forward and extending his hand. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting." I shook his hand. A firm, confident handshake, but his palm was damp with nervousness. "Please come in." I gestured toward a small sitting area in the back of the workshop, where there was an old sofa and 2 armchairs. "Tea? Coffee?" "Coffee would be wonderful," Bryce replied, looking around with undisguised interest. "You have an amazing place, Violet, a real treasure trove." "Thank you," I replied modestly, heading for the electric kettle. "Mom likes order," Hazel remarked, sitting down on the edge of the sofa. "Everything is in its place. Every tool is perfectly maintained." "It's a necessity, not a whim," I said, taking 3 cups out of the cupboard. "In my line of work, mistakes are costly." Bryce nodded, approaching the work table with a magnifying glass and a set of tools. "I've always admired the art of jewelry," he said, examining the tweezers used to set stones. "Amazing precision, almost like microelectronics. Same principles. Attention to detail, a steady hand, understanding of materials." I gave him a skeptical look as I poured coffee into the cups. "Jewelry making isn't just about technique, Mr. Gwynn. It's about history, tradition, understanding aesthetics and human nature." "Bryce, please," he corrected me gently. "We're family after all. And I agree with you. I was only referring to the technical side. But art, of course, requires more than just skilled hands." He walked over to the display case with finished pieces, where some of my work was displayed, not for sale, but as examples of the workshop's capabilities. "This, for example," Bryce pointed to a silver pendant with a large aquamarine, "is stunning work. Crepaude setting, if I'm not mistaken. And what exquisite filigree around the edge." I raised an eyebrow in surprise. He had clearly prepared for the conversation by learning the basic terminology. "Thank you," I replied, serving them coffee. "Please have a seat. I think we have a lot to discuss." We sat down in chairs arranged in a small triangle. Hazel sat tensely, clutching her cup with both hands. Bryce looked more relaxed, with his legs crossed, but I noticed his fingers trembling on the armrest. "Hazel told me about your situation," I began bluntly. "About losing your job at Alphatech." Bryce nodded, his expression turning serious. "Yes, it's an unpleasant story. The company decided to cut costs, and my position was eliminated. 20 years of experience, and just like that, in one day." 20 years in electronics," I clarified. "Not in jewelry." "That's right," he agreed with a slight smile. "But, as I said, there are similarities. Working with small details, precision, the need for concentration. I'm a quick learner, Violet, and I'm willing to start from the very basics." "Why jewelry?" I asked. "With your experience, there must be other opportunities." Bryce exchanged a quick glance with Hazel, and I noticed something like a warning in that glance. "The job market is saturated right now," he replied. "Companies prefer to hire young professionals, and I've always been interested in manual labor and creating something tangible. Electronics is becoming increasingly abstract, but this is a real craft, a true art." His words sounded rehearsed, as if he had practiced this speech in front of a mirror. I took a sip of coffee, watching him over the rim of my cup. "And also," he added, lowering his voice, "here I have the opportunity to work with my family, to continue the tradition. After all, how old is this workshop? 70 years. 84, I corrected him. "My father opened it in 1941, see? History, tradition." Bryce made a sweeping gesture with his hand. "Wouldn't it be wonderful to keep it in the family?" Hazel has other interests, of course, but I could be the link, preserve the Morris legacy. I looked at my daughter, who sat silently, letting her husband do the talking. Has this always been important to you, Hazel? Preserving the family business? I asked with a hint of irony. She tensed, a flash of irritation in her eyes. I appreciate what you've built, Mom, she said cautiously. And while it's never been my calling, I wouldn't want it to end when… She faltered. When you retire. Bryce gently placed his hand on his wife's knee. We're not talking about retirement, dear, he said with a smile. Violet will continue to run the workshop for many years to come. I just want to learn, help out, and maybe take on some of the work eventually. He turned back to me. You have no idea how much I admire your craftsmanship, Violet. Sometimes I come here just to look at the display case at your work. I especially like the sapphire necklace you created for last year's exhibition. The stunning cut of the stones, the way they play with the light. I frowned. I hadn't created any sapphire necklace for the exhibition. In fact, I hadn't participated in any exhibitions last year. Every stone has its own character, its own story, Bryce continued, clearly oblivious to my confusion. How do you approach them? How do you decide which setting will best highlight their beauty? I set the cup on the table, feeling my irritation growing. Mr. Gwynn, I said, deliberately ignoring his request to call him by his first name. Let's be honest. You're not interested in jewelry. You don't even know that I didn't create any sapphire necklaces for the exhibition. You're looking for a job, any job, and you decided that as your wife's mother, I wouldn't be able to refuse. The smile disappeared from his face, giving way to a cold, calculating expression. Violet? Mom! Hazel exclaimed at the same time. This isn't fair. Bryce really admires your work. I raised my hand to stop them. I said I would listen to you, and I have. But I can't hire someone with no experience, no real interest in the craft, just because he's my son-in-law. Bryce sat up straight in his chair, his eyes narrowing. You may be right about my knowledge of jewelry. I'm no expert, and yes, I may have gone overboard trying to impress you, but I'm willing to learn. I'm good with my hands, I have a technical education, And you have problems, I interrupted him. Problems that go beyond losing your job. A heavy silence hung in the air. Hazel paled, her gaze darting to her husband. What are you talking about? She asked quietly. I looked at Bryce, watching his reaction closely. A man came to see me looking for you, Mr. Gwynn. Silas Phipps. He mentioned some debts and promises you didn't keep. Bryce's face froze, but fear flashed in his eyes. He quickly regained his composure and forced a smile. Phipps? I don't remember anyone by that name. Perhaps it was some kind of misunderstanding. I looked at Hazel. He's been here 3 times in the last 3 months, and each time he's become more insistent. Hazel turned to her husband, a question in her eyes. Bryce, what is she talking about? I have no idea. He shrugged with feigned confusion. Maybe this man confused me with someone else. I shook my head. He described you very accurately, and he knew where you work, or worked until recently. Bryce stood up, his face reddening with anger or embarrassment. This is some kind of mistake, and even if someone is looking for me about some financial issues, it has nothing to do with work. It's a personal matter. Personal? Hazel also got up from the sofa. You never told me about any debts, Bryce. He turned sharply toward her. Because there aren't any. Your mother is making this up to turn you against me. She's always disliked me. I'm not making anything up, I replied calmly. Mr. Phipps was quite specific. And judging by your reaction, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Bryce took a step toward me, his hands clenched into fists. Enough! I came here to ask for a job, not to listen to accusations and slander. Bryce, please! Hazel put her hand on his shoulder, but he shook it off. No, Hazel, I'm not going to stand here and let her insult me. If she doesn't want to help, fine. We'll manage without her, as always. Hazel turned to me, her eyes pleading. Mom, please, even if there are some misunderstandings, can't we put them aside? This is about the future of our family. I stood up too, feeling the tension in the room rising. It's your family's future I'm worried about, Hazel, especially when I see the bruises on your wrist and hear about debts you don't know about. Hazel instinctively pulled her sleeve down to cover her wrist. I told you I hid it on the cabinet. Her voice trembled. Stop lying, Hazel. I stepped toward her. I've seen bruises like that before. Someone grabbed your arm and squeezed it hard. Was it your husband? Bryce let out a laugh full of contempt. So, that's it. Now you're accusing me of abuse? Based on a bruise from a cabinet? Amazing. Mom, stop it. Hazel's eyes filled with tears. You're misunderstanding everything. Then explain it to me, I demanded. Explain the bruises. Explain Silas Phipps. Explain why you're so desperate for me to hire your husband right now. Because we're in a desperate situation, Hazel exclaimed. Because we're running out of money. Because Bryce can't find a job. Because... Enough, Hazel, Bryce cut her off sharply. Your mother made up her mind before we even got here. She never intended to help. I shook my head. I want to help, but not the way you're asking. I won't hire someone I don't trust. Someone who comes into my house, lies to my face, and possibly hurts my daughter. Bryce never hurt me, Hazel shouted. It was an accident. Her words hung in the air. She covered her mouth with her hand, realizing she had just admitted what she had been trying to hide. An accident, I repeated quietly. And how often do these accidents happen, Hazel? Bryce stepped between us, his face contorted with anger. Enough. We're leaving, Hazel. I'm not going to stand here and listen to these insinuations. He grabbed his coat from the sofa and headed for the door. Wait! Hazel turned to me, her face wet with tears. Mom, please, you've got it all wrong. Bryce is a good man. He cares about me. Yes, we're having difficulties right now, but we'll get through it if you help us. All we're asking for is a chance. I looked at my daughter and my heart ached. I saw the frightened little girl who used to run to me with a skinned knee, waiting for comfort. But I also saw a grown woman living a lie, refusing to acknowledge the truth even when it was staring her in the face. I can't, Hazel, I said firmly. I won't hire Bryce, and I think you need to take a hard look at your marriage. Her face changed. The pain and pleading were replaced by anger, the same anger I had seen in her eyes during our most vicious arguments. It's always the same, she hissed through clenched teeth. You always know best. You always judge. You never support. Even now, when I'm asking for help, you turn away from me. I'm not turning away, I objected. I'm trying to protect you. From what? From my own husband? She laughed bitterly. You don't even know him. You don't know us. You've never been interested in my life, my problems, my joys. It's always been just your precious workshop, your stones, your work. Old accusations, old wounds. But now they sounded like a diversionary tactic, an attempt to steer the conversation back to the familiar channel of mutual resentment. That's irrelevant, Hazel, I said wearily. We can discuss our relationship another time. Right now, we're talking about your safety and well-being. My well-being? She raised her voice. You never cared about my well-being. Where were you when I needed a mother, not just a nanny? Where were you when Dad was dying and I sat alone at his bedside because you couldn't get away from work? Where have you been all these years? Each word hit like a whip, striking the most painful places. I knew there was some truth in her accusations, but I also knew that right now it was just a distraction. I did what I thought was right, Hazel, I said quietly. Maybe I was wrong, but now I'm trying to fix at least one mistake, to stop you from continuing to live in a situation that is destroying you. The only thing that's destroying me is your interference in my life, she shouted, taking a step toward me. You want to help? Then help Bryce get a job. Help us keep our home, our life. But no, it's easier for you to blame him for all the sins than to just lend a helping hand. Hazel, Bryce called from the door. It's time to go. But she ignored him, focusing on me, her eyes burning with rage and tears. You'll never change, Mom. You'll always be the same cold, calculating woman who puts her principles above living people, even your own daughter. I shook my head. It's not about principles, Hazel. It's about seeing the truth that you refuse to acknowledge. What truth? She took another step toward me, her hands clenched into fists. That my husband isn't perfect? That we have problems? Who doesn't? But we love each other. We're a family. Something you could never give me. Her words hit me where it hurt the most. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. If that's love, Hazel, then I don't want you to love me like that. No one who truly loves you would leave bruises on your wrist. Her face contorted and I saw her hand fly into the air. The slap echoed loudly in the silence of the workshop. My cheek burned, but my soul ached more from the realization of what we had come to. Hazel stood in front of me, breathing heavily, her eyes wide with horror at her own actions. "Mom, she began, but stopped when the workshop door opened and the bell rang again. Silas Phipps stood in the doorway, elegant and composed as always. His cold gaze swept over the three of us, lingering on Bryce, who suddenly turned pale. "I apologize for the intrusion," Phipps said in an even voice. "I saw the light and thought the workshop was still open." Hazel froze, her gaze darting from Phipps to her husband and back again. I saw recognition and fear flash across her face. She knew this man, though she tried to hide it. Bryce took a step toward the door, but Phipps shifted slightly, blocking his way. "Mr. Gwynn?" He nodded with a barely perceptible smile. "What a happy coincidence. I've been looking for an opportunity to talk to you." "We were just leaving," Bryce replied sharply, but his voice trembled. Phipps shook his head. "I'm afraid the conversation can't wait, especially considering your, let's say, changed financial situation." Hazel looked from Phipps to her husband, the fear in her eyes replaced by confusion, then realization. "Bryce?" Her voice was barely audible. "Who is this?" I walked over to my daughter and put my hand on her shoulder. She didn't pull away. A small victory in a sea of defeats. "Daughter," I said quietly but firmly, "it's time you found out who you're really living with." The silence that followed my words seemed palpable. Hazel stared at Silas Phipps, her face frozen in an expression I couldn't quite place. A mixture of fear, confusion, and dawning understanding. Bryce was the first to break the silence. "We are leaving," he said, taking a step toward the door, but Phipps didn't move. "Please step aside." Phipps smiled, a cold, businesslike smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Gwynn, I've come a long way to see you. I think you can spare me 5 minutes of your precious time. After all," he paused, "I've been more than patient for the last 3 months." "I don't understand what's going on," Hazel said, her gaze shifting from Phipps to Bryce and back again. "Who is this man, Bryce?" Bryce ran his hand through his hair, a gesture I had seen him make when he was nervous. "No one, Hazel. Just some kind of misunderstanding." Phipps laughed, a short, barking laugh devoid of amusement. "A misunderstanding worth $32,000? A very expensive misunderstanding, I'd say." The color drained from Bryce's face. He looked at his wife, and I saw in his eyes the desperation of a man who had been backed into a corner. "32,000?" Hazel whispered. "Bryce, what is he talking about?" I moved closer to my daughter, ready to support her if necessary. Something in Bryce's expression made me uneasy. People who are backed into a corner are capable of unpredictable actions. "I assume your husband didn't share the details of his financial adventures with you, Mrs. Gwynn," said Phipps, taking a folded piece of paper out of his jacket's inside pocket. "I have here a complete account of Mr. Gwynn's debts. The first loan was taken out 6 months ago, $5,000, then another $10,000 a month later, and another $17,000 in 3 installments over the last 2 months. Plus, of course, the interest, which continues to accrue." He unfolded the paper and showed me the columns of numbers, neatly written in his impeccable handwriting. That's not true." Bryce stepped toward Hazel, trying to take her hand, but she backed away. "Hazel, don't listen to him. This man is a fraud. He's making it all up." "Then explain where you got the money," I said suddenly, looking straight at Bryce. "If you lost your job 3 weeks ago, as you claim, where did you get the money to live on? To pay your bills? For that new suit, which you obviously bought recently?" Hazel turned to me, her eyes wide. "What do you mean?" "I think your husband lost his job much earlier than 3 weeks ago," I replied. "And the reason for his dismissal was not due to downsizing. Am I correct, Mr. Phipps?" Phipps nodded, his face expressing almost boredom, like a man watching a predictable scene. "Mr. Gwynn was fired from Alpha Tech more than 3 months ago, for inappropriate behavior if I am correctly informed. Something to do with corporate funds that he used for personal needs." "That's a lie!" Bryce shouted, his face red with anger. "You're conspiring against me, you and him." He pointed his finger at me. "She never accepted me, Hazel. She was always looking for ways to destroy our marriage. Hazel looked shaken, her gaze darting between us as if she couldn't decide whom to believe. I don't know this man, I said quietly. Until 3 months ago, when he first came to my workshop, I had never seen him. Quite right, confirmed Phipps. Mrs. Morris and I were not acquainted until I began looking for Mr. Gwynn regarding his growing debt. Hazel took a step toward her husband, her voice trembling. Bryce, tell me the truth. Did you lose your job 3 months ago? I saw him hesitate, weighing his options. Finally, he sighed and slumped his shoulders. Yes, he admitted. But not because of what this man says. There was a departmental restructuring, and my position was cut. And you didn't tell me? Hazel's voice sounded hurt. You pretended to go to work for 3 months? Where did you go every morning? Bryce ran a hand over his face. I was looking for a new job, Hazel. I didn't want to worry you until I found something suitable. What about the $32,000? She asked, her voice suddenly firm. Is that a lie too? Bryce shot a hateful glance at Phipps. I had some financial difficulties, but not as serious as he claims. Phipps shook his head like a disappointed teacher. Mr. Gwynn, let's not complicate the situation with more lies. I have all the necessary documents proving your debt, including receipts signed by you. He took a few more papers out of his pocket and handed them to Hazel. I saw her hands tremble as she took them. Pay particular attention to the collateral listed on the second page, Phipps added with a barely perceptible smile. Hazel scanned the first page, and when she turned the sheet over, her hand instinctively reached for her wedding ring. My wedding ring? She looked up at her husband, and there was such pain in her eyes that my heart sank. Did you pawn my wedding ring? Bryce made a desperate gesture. It's temporary, Hazel. I was going to buy it back as soon as what? She interrupted. As soon as you won enough at the casino? Because that's how you lost the money, isn't it? Silence fell. Bryce looked as if he had been struck. How did you know about the casino? He finally managed to say. Hazel laughed bitterly. I didn't know for sure until you just confirmed it. But I suspected it. Several times I found receipts from ATMs in the area where the Golden Lotus Casino is located in your pockets. And sometimes you smelled like their signature cigars. I just didn't want to believe it. She looked at the list again. It says here that you mortgaged our house. Is that true? Bryce swallowed, his face covered in sweat. Not the whole house. I took out a second mortgage. Without my knowledge, without my signature? Hazel's voice rose with indignation. Is that even legal? Phipps interjected. Technically, no. But Mr. Gwynn has been very creative in this matter. I believe forging a spouse's signature on financial documents is a criminal offense in this state. Bryce glared at him. You suggested this option yourself. You said it was routine practice. I simply outlined the possible options, Phipps replied calmly. The choice was always yours, Mr. Gwynn. Hazel sank onto the sofa as if her legs had given way beneath her. I sat down next to her and gently took her hand. She didn't resist. What else? She asked quietly, looking at the papers. What else did you pawn, Bryce? Your car, Phipps said, as if reading from a shopping list. Your jewelry, including the sapphire earrings your parents gave you for your 25th birthday. Mr. Gwynn's watch collection. How could you? Whispered Hazel, looking at her husband. How could you do this to me? To us? Bryce knelt in front of her, trying to take her hands in his, but she pulled away. Hazel, I'm sorry. I got confused. I made mistakes. But I did it for us. I thought I could win it back, get it all back with interest. For us? She asked bitterly. Or for yourself, Bryce? She stood up, backing away from him. Her gaze was full of pain and determination. I can't take this anymore. I can't look you in the eye. Not after everything I've learned. Hazel, please. Bryce stood up, reaching out to her. We can fix this. Together. She shook her head, then turned to me. Did you know? She asked. Did you know all this time? I met her gaze. I suspected something was wrong, but I didn't know the specifics until tonight. And you didn't tell me, she said accusingly. Would you have believed me? I asked gently. If I had come to you and said that your husband might have a gambling problem, that he might be in debt. She looked away, and I knew the answer. She wouldn't have believed me. She would have taken Bryce's side, as she always did when she had to choose between him and me. I tried to hint at it, I continued. I asked about your marriage, about your finances, but you always said everything was fine. Hazel nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. I have to go, she said. I need to think. Be alone. She headed for the door without looking at Bryce. Hazel, wait, he rushed after her. We need to talk. No, Bryce. She turned around, her eyes sparkling with tears. There's nothing left to talk about. You lied to me. You betrayed me. I can't. I just can't be around you right now. She looked at Phipps. You'll get your money. Somehow, but not from him. She nodded at Bryce. From me. With that, she left the workshop, leaving the three of us in heavy silence. 3 weeks have passed since that fateful meeting in my workshop. 3 weeks filled with silence and anxiety. Hazel hasn't called, hasn't come by, hasn't given any sign of life. I tried to call her several times, but the phone always went to voicemail. My only message, Hazel, please call me, I'm worried about you, went unanswered. November in Central Point was cold and cloudy. Rain drummed on the workshop roof almost continuously, creating a monotonous backdrop for my gloomy thoughts. I worked as usual, but my hands moved mechanically and my thoughts were far away. With my daughter, who had distanced herself again, perhaps now forever. On one of those rainy days, the bell above the workshop door jingled, letting in my last customer before the lunch break, Doris Pemberton, a lady in her 60s who lived in the neighborhood next to Hazel's. Doris brought in her favorite pearl earrings for repair, a simple job, but one that required attention. Terrible weather, isn't it, Violet? She said, taking off her wet raincoat. They say it will continue until the end of the month. Central Point is famous for its November rains, I replied, taking the earrings. Have a seat and I'll see what I can do. Doris sat down on a chair near the counter, looking curiously at the display cases while I examined the clasp on the earrings. The clasp is a little loose, but it's easy to fix, I said. It'll be ready by this evening. Oh, thank you, dear, Doris smiled. I'm so attached to these earrings. My late husband gave them to me on our 30th wedding anniversary. I nodded, understanding her feelings. Some jewelry is valuable not so much for the material or craftsmanship as for the memories it holds. By the way, I saw your daughter the other day, Doris remarked casually. Hazel, right? My heart skipped a beat. Yes, Hazel. Where did you see her? At the supermarket on Oak Street. She looked a little tired, I'd say. Doris lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. And I noticed she wasn't wearing her wedding ring. I tried to keep a straight face, even though inside I was crumbling. So Hazel really had left Bryce. No second thoughts, no coming back. We talked a little, Doris continued, clearly enjoying her role as messenger. She said she's staying with a friend temporarily. I think her name is Rita. She lives in that new complex on the west side. Rita Klein has been Hazel's best friend since school. They remained close despite Rita remaining unmarried and pursuing a career as a lawyer, choosing a path completely different from Hazel's. I heard, Doris leaned in closer, her voice becoming very quiet, that something happened between her and Bryce. Mrs. Finch, who lives 2 houses down, says she saw him taking his things out of the house last Sunday. It looks like they broke up. I remained silent, not wanting to confirm the rumors, even if they were true. Hazel's personal life remained her personal life, despite the small town's thirst for gossip. Poor girl, Doris sighed, taking my silence as confirmation. It's always hard when a marriage breaks up, especially at her age. Starting all over again. Hazel is strong, I said, closing the box with the earrings. She'll be fine. Oh, I'm sure she will, Doris agreed hastily. She's always been so determined, just like her mother. I felt a slight bitterness at the comparison. If Hazel really were like me, perhaps she wouldn't be in this situation. Or perhaps it was our similarities, our stubbornness, our pride, that had led to us not speaking to each other again. It'll be $22 for the repair, I said, steering the conversation back to business. You can come by after 6. Doris paid, put on her raincoat, and headed for the door. At the door, she turned around. You know, Violet, sometimes children need time to understand that their parents always want what's best for them, even if their methods aren't always successful. I nodded, surprised by this unexpected wisdom from a woman I knew mainly as a gossip. Perhaps her frivolous facade hid her own experience of difficult family relationships. After Doris left, I closed the workshop for lunch, but I didn't feel like eating. I just sat at my desk, watching the rain outside the window and thinking about Hazel. Knowing that she had left Bryce brought mixed feelings. Relief that she had not stayed with the man who had caused her so much pain, and concern for her future. But what bothered me most was that she had not turned to me. She had not allowed me to help. She had chosen to rely on a friend rather than her mother. But then, could I blame her? Our relationship had always been complicated. I wasn't the kind of mother who would drop everything for her child's emotional needs. I was strict, focused on my work, unable to express my feelings the way Hazel wanted me to. But that didn't mean I didn't love her. I just loved her in my own way, the only way I knew how. I took a notebook and pen out of my desk drawer. Maybe I should write her a letter. Something more substantial than a short voice message, but the words wouldn't come together. How could I explain everything I hadn't been able to explain in the 42 years of her life? How could I convince her that, despite all my shortcomings as a mother, I had always wanted only the best for her? At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, while I was serving a customer, the bell above the door rang again. I looked up and saw Silas Phipps, neat and unruffled as always. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Morris," he said, nodding to me. "I apologize for the intrusion. I can wait until you're finished with your customer." I nodded, finishing the receipt for Mrs. Anderson, who had brought in an antique medallion for repair. After she left, I turned to Phipps. "How can I help you, Mr. Phipps? If you're looking for Bryce Ginn, I still don't know where he is." Phipps smiled slightly as he approached the counter. "No, I'm here about something else today. Actually, I have a proposal that might interest you and your daughter." I tensed. Something in his tone, too soft, too calculated, made me wary. "What kind of proposal?" Phipps looked around as if assessing the situation. "I like your workshop, Mrs. Morris. It has character, history. How long have you been working here?" 51 years, I replied. "But I doubt you came here to discuss my work history." He nodded, acknowledging my bluntness. "You're right, of course. I came to talk about your son-in-law's debt, or rather, your ex-son-in-law, as I understand it. That's between you and Bryce, or between you and Hazel, if she has decided to take on his debts, although I think that's a mistake." Phipps took a familiar folder of documents out of his jacket's inside pocket. "You see, the situation is a little more complicated than that. Mr. Gwynn has disappeared. He has left town, possibly even the state. And Mrs. Gwynn, with all due respect to her intentions, is unlikely to be able to pay such an amount in the near future, especially considering that the house and car will be confiscated." I felt anger rising inside me. Bryce had run away, leaving Hazel to deal with the consequences of his irresponsibility. This was what I had feared. "What do you suggest?" I asked, trying to remain calm. Phipps pointed to the display case where some of my best work was on display. "You have a wonderful collection, Mrs. Morris. I'm particularly interested in this necklace." He pointed to an antique silver necklace with a large amethyst framed by small diamonds. My heart sank. Of all the jewelry, he had chosen this one, a family heirloom that had belonged to my mother and, before her, my grandmother. The only thing I had left from my parents. "It's not for sale," I said firmly. "It's a family heirloom." "I understand," Phipps nodded. "And that's exactly why it's perfect for my purpose." He paused as if savoring the moment. "You see, I'm getting married. My fiancée, Olivia, comes from an old family, and she appreciates things with history, with soul. I would like to give her something special, something that symbolizes the continuity of generations." I looked at him, not believing my ears. This man, who squeezed money out of debtors, who may have pushed Bryce into even greater debt, was now talking about family values and symbolic gifts. "And what does that have to do with Bryce's debt?" I asked. Phipps smiled. "I'm willing to write off a significant portion of the debt in exchange for this necklace. Let's say $20,000. I pressed my lips together, trying to hide my indignation. "And you think I'm going to sell a family heirloom to help a man who lied to my daughter, stole from her, and then ran away?" "No," Phipps replied calmly. "I think you will sell a family heirloom to help your daughter." who is now responsible for her husband's debts and risks losing everything. He was right, and that was the most unpleasant part. Hazel had taken responsibility for Bryce's debts, and if she couldn't pay them off, the consequences would be catastrophic. Bankruptcy, loss of credit history, possibly even lawsuits. Everything she had built over the years would collapse. "Why this necklace?" I asked, buying time to think. "I have other jewelry that is more valuable from a material point of view." Phipps tilted his head, studying me with his gaze. "Let's just say I appreciate symbolism. Olivia will receive a piece of jewelry with history, with emotional value, and you will make a sacrifice for your daughter. After all, that's what mothers do, isn't it? They make sacrifices for their children." It was a low blow, deliberately targeting my most vulnerable spot, my relationship with Hazel, my guilt over not always being the perfect mother. "You're a manipulator, Mr. Phipps," I said, looking him straight in the eye. He didn't deny it. "I'm a businessman, Mrs. Morris, and right now, I'm offering you a business deal that benefits all parties. Your daughter gets rid of a significant portion of her debt. My fiancé gets a wonderful gift. I get the pleasure of making the woman I love happy. Everyone wins." "Except me," I remarked. "You get the opportunity to help your daughter. Isn't that what you want?" I looked at the necklace glistening in the display case. Every time I looked at it, I remembered my mother, her graceful hands adjusting the clasp, her proud posture when she wore it on special occasions. "It's not just jewelry, Violet," she would say. "It's part of our history, our dignity. One day it will be yours, and then it will pass on to your daughter. Hazel." This necklace was supposed to go to Hazel. But what is the point of a family heirloom if you have to sacrifice your daughter's well-being to save it? 25,000, I said firmly. "And you will provide me with written confirmation that this amount has been deducted from Hazel's debt." Phipps looked surprised, perhaps not expecting me to start bargaining. 22,000, he offered, and full written confirmation. 25, I repeated. "The necklace is worth it." We looked at each other for a few seconds, then Phipps smiled, sincerely for the first time. "Agreed. 25,000. He took out his checkbook and wrote a check, then handed me a pen and a receipt form he had already prepared. I read the document carefully, made sure it clearly stated the amount to be deducted from Hazel's debt, and signed it. Then, with a heavy heart, I opened the display case and took out the necklace. I ran my fingers over the smooth facets of the amethyst one last time, remembering how I used to do that when I was little, sitting on my mother's lap. "Take good care of it," I said, placing the necklace in a velvet case. "It's over 100 years old." "I promise," Phipps nodded, taking the case. "Olivia will wear it with respect for its history." I doubted that a stranger could truly appreciate the significance of this necklace, its place in my family's history. But now it didn't matter. The main thing was that Hazel would get a chance to start over, without the crushing burden of debt. Phipps left, taking with him a piece of my history, a piece of my heart. I watched him go, feeling a strange emptiness. Was this sacrifice the right decision? Would Hazel appreciate what I had done, or would she see it as yet another intrusion into her life? In the evening, after closing the workshop, I returned home and sat down at the table with a sheet of paper and a pen. It was time to write Hazel a letter, to explain my actions, my motives, perhaps even to apologize for past mistakes. "Dear Hazel," I began, and the words flowed more easily than I had expected. I told her about Phipps' visit, his offer, and my decision to sell the necklace. I explained that I did it not to control her life or make decisions for her, but to give her the opportunity to breathe more freely, without the constant fear of losing everything. But I wrote about something else too, that I had always loved her, even though I might not have been able to show it in the way she needed, about how proud I was of her strength and determination to start over, about how sorry I was that our relationship had been so difficult all these years. "I know I wasn't the perfect mother," I wrote. "Too often I put work before family, too rarely found the time and words to express my love. But that doesn't mean there was no love. It was always there, Hazel. It always will be. Maybe now we are both old enough to try to understand each other again. Not as mother and daughter, bound by obligations and expectations, but as two women who have been through a lot and can learn from each other." I'm not asking for forgiveness, and I don't expect an immediate response. Just know that I'm here if you need me, and that the necklace that was meant to be yours will now help you build a new life. Perhaps that's a better use for a family heirloom than just gathering dust in a box. With love, Mom. I sealed the letter in an envelope and wrote Rita's address on it, knowing she wouldn't refuse to pass it on to Hazel. Tomorrow I would mail it and then wait, patiently, without expectations. Time would tell if we could find our way back to each other through all the mistakes of the past. February snow swirled slowly outside the workshop window, covering the sidewalks and roofs of Central Point with a soft white blanket. I was finishing a gold bracelet, skillfully weaving the chain, link by link. My hands moved confidently, automatically, repeating movements honed over decades of practice. Age had slowed me down, but it hadn't robbed me of my precision. 3 months had passed since I sent the letter to Hazel, and the same amount of time since I sold the family necklace to Silas Phipps. I never received a reply from my daughter, but I learned from Rita through mutual acquaintances that Hazel had received the letter. That was all I was allowed to know. During those 3 months, life went on as usual. Clients came and went, orders were fulfilled, bills were paid. But something had changed in me. Something had shifted after I sold the necklace. It was as if, by giving away the last thing that connected me to my parents, I had freed myself from a part of my past and a part of myself. More and more often, I found myself thinking that perhaps it was time to pass the business on to someone else. Abigail Freeman, my apprentice for the past 5 years, showed real talent. At 32, she possessed not only technical skills, but also that aesthetic sense that cannot be learned. You either have it or you don't. Abigail had it. She could carry on the tradition of the Morris workshop, albeit under a different name. I finished the last link in the chain and placed the bracelet on a velvet cushion. The work was flawless, as it should be. My professional pride would not allow anything else. The bell above the door jingled, announcing a visitor. I looked up, expecting to see Mrs. Crawford, who was supposed to pick up her repaired earrings, but instead, Hazel was standing in the doorway. My heart skipped a beat. My daughter looked different from when we last met, thinner, paler, but with a new determination in her posture. She was dressed in a simple dark blue coat, her hair pulled back in a simple bun, no jewelry except for a pair of silver stud earrings. "Hi, Mom," she said, staying at the door as if unsure about her decision to come in. "Hazel?" My voice sounded hoarser than I expected. "Come in, please. It's cold outside." She nodded, closed the door behind her, and took a few steps inside. The workshop was so small that even that was enough to reduce the distance between us to a few feet. "How are you?" I asked, not knowing where to start. Hazel shrugged. "I'm getting by." She looked around the workshop, and I noticed her gaze linger on the empty space in the display case where the amethyst necklace had once been. "I got your letter," she said finally. "And the check from Mr. Phipps. $25,000 has been taken off the balance." I nodded, not knowing what to say. Was she grateful? Angry at my interference? Her face, always so expressive, now seemed like a mask hiding her true feelings. "You shouldn't have done that," Hazel continued. "It was your necklace, your memory of your grandmother." "It was meant to be yours," I replied. "It just happened to help you in a different way." Hazel took another step, her hand touching the counter. "You sold a family heirloom to help me pay off the debts of a man you never approved of." There was no accusation in her voice, more surprise, even bewilderment. "I sold a family heirloom to help a daughter I love," I corrected. "Whoever her husband may be." Hazel looked at me for a long time as if trying to solve a puzzle. "All my life, I thought your jewelry was more important to you than I was," she said finally. "That the workshop, the work, the business would always come first." "I gave you reasons to think that," I admitted. "Too many reasons, but it was never true." Hazel looked away, her fingers tapping nervously on the counter. "I've filed for divorce," she said after a pause. "The lawyer says it will be straightforward given the circumstances. Bryce hasn't been in touch, but his lawyer contacted mine. He doesn't object to the divorce." "How generous of him." I couldn't help being sarcastic. The corner of Hazel's mouth twitched in a semblance of a smile. "Yes, isn't it?" she sighed. Until we sell the house, I'm staying with Rita. But next week, I'm moving into a small apartment in Lakeview. Lakeview is a new neighborhood on the other side of town, far from Bryce's old house and mine. It's a nice area, I said. Quiet, with a park nearby. Yes, Hazel nodded. And only 20 minutes from the lab. I'm back full time. I'm glad, I replied sincerely. Hazel had always loved her job as a chemical analyst, and the fact that she was returning to it was a good sign. There was an awkward pause. We both sensed that there was more behind these mundane phrases, unspoken emotions, questions with no easy answers. Why didn't you tell me about Bryce earlier? Hazel finally asked. About Phipps? About your suspicions? Why did you wait until things got so bad? There it was. The question I knew would come up sooner or later. I wasn't sure, I replied honestly. Suspicions aren't proof. And you wouldn't have believed me. You would have thought I was trying to control your life again. Like now with the necklace? Bitterness crept into her voice. This is different, Hazel. I didn't tell you what to do. I just offered to help in the only way I could. She nodded, acknowledging that I was right. I talked to Rita about it. She said you acted like a real mother. That not every parent is willing to make such a sacrifice for their child. I felt an unexpected gratitude toward Rita, who had always been more objective in her assessment of my actions than Hazel. Rita is a wise woman, I said, and a good friend. Yes, agreed Hazel. She supported me when I was feeling very bad, and she made me think about some things. What things? I asked cautiously. Hazel walked over to the display case where my latest works were on display. That maybe I've been unfair to you all these years, that you did everything you could as best you could. That being a mother isn't just about hugging and comforting, but also about providing a roof over our heads, food on the table, and an education. She ran her finger along the glass of the display case. That your work wasn't selfish, as I thought when I was a child. It was your way of taking care of us. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. After so many years, so many arguments and misunderstandings, hearing these words was almost painful. I wanted to be a better mother, Hazel, I said quietly, but I didn't know how. My own mother was the same, reserved, focused on practical things. I didn't know how to express my feelings the way you needed me to. Hazel turned to me. And I was too demanding, too emotional, like Dad. She smiled weakly. We're so different. And yet so similar, I added. Your stubbornness, your determination, it all comes from me, whether you want to admit it or not. I know, she nodded. And now I'm grateful for those qualities. They helped me survive when everything was falling apart. We fell silent again, but now the silence was less tense. It was as if we had both finally said something important that we had been holding inside for a long time. I'm not ready for a close relationship, Mom, Hazel finally said. Too much has happened. Too much pain, too much disappointment. I need time to put myself back together. I nodded, feeling a twinge of pain, but understanding her. Of course, you need to focus on yourself right now. But, she took a deep breath, I think we could try to start over, slowly. Maybe talk on the phone sometimes. Maybe have lunch together sometime. It was more than I dared hope for, and I felt my heart fill with warmth. I'd like that, I replied quietly. Very much. Hazel nodded, as if she had made an important decision. I'll call, not right away, but I will. She glanced at her watch. I have to go. I have a meeting with the realtor at 2. Of course. I took a step back, giving her space. Thanks for stopping by, Hazel. She headed for the door, but stopped halfway. I didn't thank you for the necklace, for helping with the debt. There's no need, I said. You're my daughter. I did what I had to do. She looked at me for a long moment, and for a second I saw in her eyes the reflection of the little girl who once looked at me with absolute trust before life, and my mistakes built a wall between us. Goodbye, Mom, she said finally. Goodbye, Hazel. Take care. She nodded and left, the bell tinkling as she went. I stood in the middle of the workshop, filled with complex emotions, relief, hope, a slight sadness. It wasn't complete reconciliation, but it was a step, a small, cautious step toward each other. The rest of the day passed in the usual way. I finished the bracelet, served a few customers, and prepared an order of stones for future work. But my thoughts kept returning to Hazel's visit, to her words, to how she looked, tired but determined. My daughter was starting a new life, and in that life, there might be a place for me. Not the one I had once dreamed of, but a place nonetheless. At 7 o'clock, I began to close the workshop. I put away my tools, wiped down the work surface, and put the finished pieces in the safe. These were routine actions that I had performed thousands of times, but today they seemed special, as if I were closing not only the workshop, but an entire chapter of my life. I took an old photograph in a simple silver frame out of my desk drawer, the only personal decoration in my workspace. There are 3 of us in the picture: me, Alfred, and little Hazel, about 5 years old. It was a picnic day in the city park. Alfred insisted that I close the workshop for the day and organize this outing. In the photo, Hazel is sitting between us, her hair tied back in 2 cute pigtails, her face glowing with happiness. Alfred is hugging us both, his smile wide and open. And I look a little tense, like someone who is not used to leisure. But there is warmth in my eyes as I look at my daughter. We were happy that day, truly happy. And although such moments were rare islands in a sea of everyday worries and responsibilities, they did exist. It's just that I realized their value too late. I ran my finger over Alfred's face in the photo. What would he say if he saw us with Hazel now? He would probably try to build bridges between us in his own way, as he did when he was alive. He was always a buffer, a translator of feelings that my daughter and I couldn't express directly. My gaze fell on the empty space in the display case where the amethyst necklace had once stood. Its absence was physically palpable, like a void in my chest. But along with the sadness came the realization that perhaps this was the best fate for the family heirloom, to help Hazel free herself from the past and start a new life. I put the photo back in the drawer and glanced around the workshop. I had spent 51 years here creating beauty from metal and stones, putting all my strength, all my skill, all my talent into my work. The workshop was my refuge, my fortress, my pride. But perhaps it was time to move on. I opened my diary and wrote, "Talk to Abigail about handing over the business." The decision that had been maturing over the past few months had finally taken shape. It was time to make way for youth, new ideas, and new energy. I won't be leaving completely. I'll remain a consultant and work on special orders, but I'll hand over the day-to-day business to someone else. Maybe this will give me time for other things. To read the books I've been putting off for years, for trips I've dreamed of taking, for rebuilding my relationship with my daughter, slowly, carefully, respecting the boundaries she has set. I turned off the lights, locked the door, and went outside. The snow had stopped, leaving behind a clean white blanket sparkling under the streetlights. The air was frosty and fresh, the sky clear with the first stars appearing. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with cold air. 74 years of life, more than 50 years of work, and only now was I beginning to understand what was really important. Not necklaces, not the workshop, not professional achievements. It was the connections between people, the relationships we build or destroy with our actions and words. I was late with many of life's lessons. I realized too late the value of time spent with family. I failed to be the mother Hazel wanted me to be. But maybe all is not lost. Maybe we both have enough wisdom, patience, and love to find our way to each other, not through obligations or expectations, but through acceptance and understanding. With this thought in mind, I headed home, leaving the dark shop window behind me. Tomorrow will be a new day, and who knows what it will bring.